Welcome back to Math 103. This is video number 4 on fair division. Last time we were looking at an example of 4 siblings who inherit a house and each one thinks that the house is worth $400,000. We saw that if they sell the house for $360,000, or indeed for anything less than $400,000 in the open market, and split the cash proceeds, then they all get shortchanged. So how about another approach? Is the following a fair division? Wendy gets the house, but she buys out each of her siblings. That means she pays each of her siblings $100,000. The answer is yes. This is a fair division. So let's see what that means. It means that it's fair for Wendy, and it's fair for each of her siblings. From Wendy's point of view, she's getting a house, and that house is worth $400,000 to her. But she's paying out cash. She's paying out $300,000 in cash, $100,000 to each sibling. So she gets a house worth $400,000 and pays out $300,000 in cash. The net benefit to her is $100,000. Right? So from this whole transaction, she's coming out $100,000 ahead of where she was before they inherited the house in the first place. So what does Wendy get? She gets a minimum fair share for her. Right, the whole house, all the goods, was worth $400,000. She is entitled to 1/4 of that because there are 4 players, 4 siblings. So her minimum fair share amount is $100,000. Right, so under this arrangement, she's getting exactly her minimum fair share. What about her siblings? Well, each sibling is receiving $100,000 in cash. So from their point of view, each one is receiving exactly a minimum fair share. And that means that overall, each one of the 4 siblings has received a fair share. In fact, a minimum fair share. The key point here is that no one is getting shortchanged in this scenario, whereas in the previous scenario, where they just sold the house at market value and split the cash, everyone was getting shortchanged. A key assumption in our whole analysis here is that the players are making choices based solely on their own preferences. In other words, we assume that they either don't know one another's preferences, or they act as if they didn't know. So there's no negotiation or strategy involved. No one is trying to outthink the other person by bidding slightly below them or bidding slightly above them. There's none of that going on. Now, is that realistic? Well, in a certain sense, not at all. But that's okay, because we're developing a first understanding of fair division. A first understanding. We're building up from a simplified version in order to be able to make it more realistic and therefore more complicated later. This is exactly how one always proceeds in mathematical and scientific modeling. You start out with simplifying assumptions and then you work your way up from there. Furthermore, even this simplified model is not entirely unrealistic. As we just showed in our previous example, this analysis can point out to people who are involved in dividing goods what their different options are and how certain options they might not have considered work out better for everyone than other options that they might have thought were the only way to proceed. Right? So it might not have occurred to the siblings that they could do better by getting over themselves and letting Wendy have the house, because everyone else getting compensated makes everyone happier at the end of the day than just selling the house on the open market and everyone getting shortchanged. So if this were not just one topic in a larger course, if we were making a whole course out of fair division, we would acknowledge that when players divide goods, they are often aware of each other's preferences and they make strategic choices as a result, just as voters do. And we would also acknowledge that when players divide goods, they often do negotiate with one another. But for now, to make things manageable and hold on to our sanity, we are going to stick to our simplifying assumptions. Now let's make our example a little more interesting. Suppose that Xavier reevaluates and considers the house to be worth $450,000 after he's thought about it some more, while the others still value it at $400,000. There are many ways that this could happen in real life. For example, in the meantime, Xavier has just gotten an offer, a job offer, back in his original hometown, and if he has to buy a house there anyway, he'd rather move back into the house he grew up in. So suddenly this becomes more valuable to him than it otherwise would have been. This is just an example. Or maybe he remembers back in childhood how he buried some treasure underneath the floorboards in the basement. I don't know, something like this. So before going on to the next video, answer the following question. Which of the following two scenarios is a fair division, and why or why not? So scenario number 1, Xavier gets the house, and he pays each of his siblings $110,000. Or scenario number 2, Wendy gets the house and pays each of her siblings $110,000. So almost the same scenario, it just differs by who is actually getting the house.